Masechet Nazir Daf Mem Bet. We're going to be seeing some interesting Mishnayot today about a Nazir shampooing his hair. Does he have to worry that by rubbing it, then he will cause some hair to fall out? Also, if a Nazir is Tameh already, does he violate if he becomes Tameh once again? If he's already Tameh, how many times would that happen? All right, we'll see that soon. But first, we're going back to that Mishnah in Masechet Negaim that said there are three people that have to shave their hair, and they have their laws in common. Amar mor v'cholam shegilechu shelo betad o sheshiyeru shete se'arot lo asu velo kelum. The three are the Mesorah, the Levi, and the Nazir. They all have to use a razor, and they have to shave all their head. If they don't, all of their hair. If they don't use a razor, or if they leave over even just two or more hairs, then it's as if they did nothing. They did not complete their obligation. If they leave just one hair, that's okay. All right. So now, based on that Mishnah, we have an important statement. Amarav acha bered Rav Ika. Zot omeret rubo kekulo medeoraita. Mimai medegale rachamana gabe nazir bayom hashebi'i yigalechenu. Hachahu de'ad ika kulo ha be'alma rubo kekulo. Rav Acha says that we're going to learn from here, meaning from Nazir, that in general we apply a principle that the majority is like all of it, and we're going to learn this from the Torah itself. So there's a legal fiction that generally, when you need to do something, but if you did most of it, then we can consider most of it as if the entire thing is done. Now, this is not true over here regarding Nazir, but that's from this rule we can learn that everywhere else is not so. So, in other words, because the Torah, Rachamana, Hashem said regarding Nazir, let's look at that pasuk inside. We're talking about a Nazir who, in the middle of Nazirut, suddenly became Tameh Lamet. So we're talking about a defiled Nazir. He didn't want to become Tameh Met. He did in the middle. So v'timeh rosh nizro v'gilach rosho b'yom taharoto b'yom hashevi'i yigalechenu. Notice the double language. First it says he shaves his head, and on the day that he will be purified, on the seventh day, yigalechenu, he shaves it. So it says v'gilach and yigalechenu twice. From this context here, we learn that the Nazir has to shave every single hair because it says it twice. But that's only here, hacha, when it's total. But we can learn from here, why does it have to go out of its way to specify over here every single last hair? Because if it doesn't specify it, meaning everywhere else in the Torah, as long as you have the majority, that's sufficient. So what other cases would that apply to? It seems that's applying to the Levi and the Mesorah. And so Rav Acha's derivation here is actually arguing with the Mishnah. The Mishnah said all three have to cut every single hair, right, down to 0 or 1. And he's saying, no, look, this pasuk only says it regarding Nazir, and that means in other cases, the majority is fine, and you can use that legal fiction for a Levi and a Mesorah. Okay, that's Rav Acha's chidush. Now, matkif la Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Hanina. Hai ben Nazir tameh ketiv. Rabbi Yosef, other versions have a different name here, but whoever it is, said, wait a second, that pasuk that you pointed to that has the double yigalechenu is talking about Nazir tameh. So according to you, only a Nazir tameh who has to do the ritual in the middle of Nazirut to restart, only he has that obligation to cut every single hair, and if he leaves 2, it's no good. But a Nazir Tahor, according to your opinion, Nazir Tahor, he reached all the way to the end, and he's doing his concluding ceremony. He could do the majority of his hair, and we would apply rubo kekulo according to you, and that's crazy because that's against the Mishnah, it's against our whole discussion we've been having so far. So, are you really going to take this so far that you're going to apply the legal fiction to all the cases of the Mishnah, right? And you're going to say the realist position, the one that you really have to take off every single hair, you're going to say that only applies to Nazir Tameh. So that's Rabbi Yosef's objection. But Rabbi Yosef got harshly criticized. Machaku ala b'ma'arava, when they heard what he said in the west. in Eretz Yisrael, they laughed at him. Now, this is unusual. A lot of times you have sages disagree with each other, but to mock one another, right, that is somewhat rare. Although it does appear a number of times in the Talmud. If you're interested, there is a very good article called "In the West They Laughed at Him: The Mocking Realists of the Babylonian Talmud" by Professor Christine Hayes, in which she shows that what these cases of mocking have in common is that, or they're all about someone proposing a legal fiction, and the other side saying that legal fiction is crazy. So it's not just a disagreement, but more of a fundamental methodological disagreement that they have, and that's why the mocking is not simply that, I disagree with this particular law, as like, you're taking your this philosophy too far, and that is what so that's what's going on here, right? Rabbi Yosef is saying that the literal law of removing every single hair applies only to one case, Nazir Tameh, but every other case, Nazir Tahor, you could apply the legal fiction. Even though Rabbi Yosef is saying it as a challenge, all right, that's how he's interpreting the implication of this pasuk. So it's that implication that they are mocking and disagree with, and so in the West they say Mikti Nazir Tameh de betar minelan min Nazir Tahor yalif lete Nazir Tahor velelef min Nazir Tameh ma Tameh ki shiyer shete se'arot vela kilum avad hachanameh ki shiyer shete se'arot vela kilum avad. Basically saying you can equate the Nazir Tahor and Nazir Tameh. After all, Nazir Tameh, how do you know that he has to use a razor? We learn that from the Nazir Tahor. And so we already opened a connection to say that we can equate their laws. So therefore, let's allow the Nazir Tahor to come and learn something in return from Nazir Tameh. Just like Nazir Tameh has to cut every single hair, and if he leaves two, it's no good. So too, Nazir Tahor, he has to cut every single hair, otherwise it's no good. And therefore, we can limit the legal fiction and the real law of removing every single hair down to 0 or 1. That applies to Nazir Tameh for sure. That's the context of the pasuk. And it will also apply to Nazir Tahor, right? Nazir Tameh and Nazir Tahor. So we're good at least with those. Although for the others, for the Mesorah and for the Levi, even though the Mishnah said that they also have to cut every hair, according to this derivation, we would apply the legal fiction there. Okay, so fascinating discussion, and now we have a couple of theoretical questions. Let's say you have a Nazir, and he shaved his head, all the hairs of his head, except for 2. And now, if he then goes on the same day and cuts the other 2, then it's fine. He can do it in one now and one a little bit later. But what if he waits and now his head grew hair again, and then he shaved just those 2? So do those hairs invalidate or not? Do we say, look, in the end, he did shave every single hair of his head, right? Except that it was at different times. And when he shaved the last 2, the other hair already grew in. But he shaved every single hair, so it's okay. Or do we say, no, he has to at some point be totally bald and shave them all in one sitting? And he didn't do that, and so it's no good. Okay, that's a question. We're not going to answer it right now, but we're going to ask an even more difficult question. Nazir shegelech v'hiniach shete se'arot v'gelech achat v'nashra achat. Mahu. So similarly, Nazir shaved all of the hairs of his head except for 2, and then he shaved 1. But the last one fell out on its own. The problem here is that when we say shave, the act of shaving is defined, or possibly defined, as shaving 2 hairs, right? If it's just 1 hair, you can't really call that shaving. It's kind of like, writing one letter is not writing. Writing two letters is only writing. So what do we say? Amar le'arav acha medifti l'ravina gelech se'ara se'ara kamibaya le'rava. So Rav Acha says, wait, that's not a problem. What's wrong with that? That's an easy one to answer. What if you shave hair by hair, right? So would that be a problem? No, if you're shaving, you're shaving one hair at a time, but then you go and you're shaving all the everything. So that would certainly be called shaving. So you're shaving the entire head except for two, and then some minutes later you shave another one. So we'll connect that one with the shaving from before, and now you have just one left that happened to fall out. So that should be totally fine. Ela ema nashra achat v'gilech achat mahu. Rather, no, we're talking about turn it the opposite way. He shaved all of his hair except for two hairs, but then one fell out, and then he shaved the last very one. What about that? So the answer is Amale kiluach enkan se'ad enkan. He says, sorry, there's no act of shaving here, and there's also no hair left. So you're really in trouble because one fell out. So he did everything except for two. All that shaving is not valid because there's two left. And now if he shaves the last two, fine, but one fell out, so now he can't do an act of shaving anymore. So even if he shaves the last one, it's no good, right? So that's his point. Now we're just going to clarify. Hold on. Ise'ad enkan giluach yeshkan. Wait a second. If there's no hair, then there is shaving. If there's no hair, that means he shaved it all, right? So shouldn't that be good? No. Hachikama is what he meant to say. He just said it in a bit of a witty way. Afal pisha se'ad enkan misvat giluach enkan. Even though there's no hair left, still he didn't do the mitzvah of shaving because he was down to the last two. So it all depends on those last two. He has to shave them both, and an act of shaving is defined as shaving at least two, but then one fell out, and so now there's one left, and you can't do an act of shaving on one hair. So even though he shaved the last hair, that's not considered an act of shaving, and therefore there is no mitzvah of shaving, and he's going to have to do the whole thing all over again. All right, now next Mishnah. Nazir chofef faspes aval lo sorek. A Nazir can chofef, chafifa, he can shampoo his head and scrub it. He can also separate his hairs with his fingers, but he cannot use a comb. All right, let's see the Gemara's explanation. Chofes umifaspes maneh. So who would this follow? Which opinion? Rabbi Shimon hidamar davar she'en mitkaven mutar, aval lo sorek atan l'Rabbanan. So it seems like the beginning of this is Rabbi Shimon, who says if you don't have intention to violate, then it's permitted. We're familiar with Rabbi Shimon from Hilchot Shabbat, where similarly Rabbi Shimon says, right, if I'm trying to get a chair from here to there on the grass, and I drag it, and even though it very well may make a furrow, but that's not my intention. I just want to get it over there so I can sit over there. So that's called davar she'en mitkaven. I don't have intention for my intention is not to make a furrow. I don't care about the furrow. My intention is for something else. So Rabbi Shimon says that's permitted. Similar, it doesn't only apply to Hilchot Shabbat, applies here as well. So since he's rubbing his hair, and it could be that it will fall out, but his intention is not to pull his hair out. His intention is only to clean his hair. So that's permitted. Fine. That would be Rabbi Shimon. But then, if you continue reading, but he cannot sorek, he cannot comb. Why not? According to the Rabbi Shimon, when you comb your hair, isn't your intention to make it straight, to make it look nice, take out the knots? And it's not allowed. So it must be that this Rabbi Shimon would permit it. So it must be that the Sefa is Rabbanan who say davar she'mitkaven is prohibited. But then the beginning should also be prohibited. In other words, what's the difference between scrubbing with shampoo, separating with fingers, and combing? And the answer is Resha Rabbi Shimon v'Sefa. So we question Resha Rabbi Shimon Sefa Rabbanan. What do you have? Two authors within just 6 words? So no, Amar Rabba Kula Rabbi Shimon he kol asorek lasid nimin medul dalot mitkaven. No, in fact, all of the Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, and that explains the first cases that he's just shampooing. He doesn't mean to take anything out, so it could be some things will fall out, but that's okay because that was not his intention. However, However, when you're combing hair, part of your intention of combing the hair is in fact to remove those stray hairs. All right, you want to get them out, and so it's not just inevitable or almost inevitable that hairs are going to come out. That is included in your intention. Yes, you want to make your hair straight, you want to remove knots, but you also want to get out, remove those stray hairs, and therefore that is davar that you are mitkaven to violate, and that's why even the Rabbi Shimon prohibits that. All right, very good. Next Mishnah, Rabbi Yishmael Omer, Lo yachof ba'adama mipnei shamasheret et hase'ar. If you are shampooing, we just said that that's permitted, but Rabbi Yishmael gives a qualification. You cannot use earth. They would use like minerals and different things that were very coarse, and they're good cleaning agents, but because they're so coarse, they actually will for sure remove hair and maybe a lot of it, and so that is not permitted. You have to use just liquid shampoo or something softer. Okay, ibaya lehu mipnei shehi masheret et hase'ar tenan or dima mipnei hammasheret tenan. Okay, question. What's the exact wording or meaning of this Mishnah? Is it mipnei shehi masheret? Is it because you cannot use earth because it will remove the hair? Or is it mipnei ha-masheret? You cannot use earth because we're worried about the type of earth that will for sure cause hair removal. Now, what will be the practical difference between putting shehi masheret or mipnei ha-masheret? Let's say you have a type of earth that is soft, not coarse, and it won't cause the hair to be removed. So if you say that because shehi masheret, don't use earth because it makes the hair fall out, then if you find some earth that doesn't make your hair fall out, then that worry doesn't apply. That's permitted, right? It's just you evaluate each substance. However, but if you say don't use any earth because we're worried that then you will come to use the type of earth that does remove your hair, well, in that case, then the gezerah is built into the Mishnah. It says don't use earth, lo yachob adama, because we're worried about the type of earth that removes hair. And in that case, even if you have some earth that doesn't remove hair, you can't use it. Teko, we don't have an answer to that. We leave it standing. All right, good. Next Mishnah, which we actually studied already. Nazir shaya shote yain kol hayom eno chayav ela achat. Amru lo al tishte shu shote hayav al kol achat ve'achat. So a Nazir who's drinking wine the whole day long, he's sitting in the bar, he keeps on drinking. That entire drinking bout he only violates once. It's one violation, and so would only get one set of lashes. However, if there are people there saying, don't drink, and then he takes a drink, and then they give him another warning. No, don't drink. Don't you know? If you're a Nazir, you're a Nazir. If you drink, you're going to get lashes. And then he drinks again. So in that case, the warnings, the hatra'ah, separates each act into a separate liability, and therefore he is liable to each and every act. Similarly, he's shaving all day. I guess he's shaving very slowly. I don't know, one hair at a time. And he's shaving for a long time. So he only violates one act of shaving. We consider that entire act to be one bout. But let's say between every hair or few hairs, someone gives him a warning. Oh, don't shave that one. Don't shave that one, or else you're going to get punished. And he does it anyway. So again, the warnings separate the acts into separate bouts of liability. And similarly, if he is tameh, lamet all day long, he's walking around in the cemeteries. he's in a constant state of tumah, then that's just one violation. Amru lo al titameh, v'hu mitameh hayav al kol achat ve'achat. But if someone says, don't go to that grave, and he does, and then they warn him again, right? Don't keep walking in the cemetery, right? Get out. And he does anyway. He keeps either going in and out or staying in the cemetery. Then he violates each and every act. Okay, and is liable to multiple sets of lashes. All right, good. Now, itemad amad abba amad Rav Huna mikra maleh diber hakatuv lo yitama. Rabbah, the third generation Amoram Bavel, says in the name of his teacher Rav Huna, the second generation. We're going to see there's going to be another interpretation of Rav Huna by Rav Yosef. That's why this is important. So Rabbah reports that we learn a lot of things from one pasuk. This pasuk lo yitama. Let's look at the pasuk inside. So we're talking about a Nazir al nefesh met lo yavo. Lo yavo. We're going to learn something from here that a Nazir is not allowed to enter into a tent or home enclosure in which there is a corpse. Furthermore, Laviv ulimol achiv ulachato lo yitama lahem bemotam. And Nazir is similar to a Kohen Gadol. It cannot even become tameh to a relative. Ki nezer Elohav al rosho, because he has this the crown of Nazirut on his head. Now, lo yitama. So from this we learn he cannot become tameh lamet in any way. That includes three possible ways in which one can become tameh lamet. Number one, contact. Actually, just touching a corpse makes one tameh. Second, by carrying it, even if you're not touching it. If you're carrying a mattress upon which a dead person is, even if you're no contact, but just carrying the weight of it, makes someone tameh. And third, the tent impurity. So this includes lo yitama, passive in any way. Okay, now when it says lo yavo, what do we need lo yavo? He shall not enter into the presence of tumat met. Laziro al tumah, laziro al habi'ah. So that comes to warn him against being tameh lamet, and specifically of entering into a tent. So therefore, if a Nazir touches a dead body or carries it, they violate one, lo yitama. But if they enter into a home, a tent where there's a corpse, then they violate two violations, lo yitama and lo yavo. The end of this sugya, we'll talk about the exact case in which one can simultaneously trigger both of these prohibitions. Okay, however, tumah v'tum'ah lo, if a Nazir is already tameh, and then he goes and becomes tameh again, well then that's no lashes for that, right? If he's already tameh lamet, and then he goes and becomes tameh lamet again, that there's no lashes. That is the opinion of Rabbah in the name of Rav Huna. However, Rav Yosef Amad Elohim, Amad Rav Huna, Afilu Tumah v'Tumah. Rav Yosef says, no, that's not what our teacher said. Rav Huna said he can become, even if he's already tameh, he can in fact become tameh again, and he would get lashes again. We're going to see, they're going to quote the Mishnah as a proof. This, by the way, is going to be significant because we're going to see in a second that we compare a Nazir to a Kohen. And this is an extremely relevant halacha. Kohen is not allowed to become tameh met. But incidentally, a Kohen can become tameh in other ways. Right? If a Kohen has a dead mouse in his house, he's allowed to touch it, take it out, even though that's tumat sheretz. There's no prohibition of a Kohen to become to other forms of tumah. Only tumat met. Okay, now, if a Kohen, so Kohen cannot become tameh lamet. What if he already is tameh lamet? And nowadays, everybody is tameh lamet. If you've ever been to a funeral home, a cemetery, a hospital, right? Places where there are potentially or actually are dead bodies. So therefore, since pretty much everybody is tameh lamet nowadays, so would there be a prohibition for them to become tameh once again? So it would actually depend on this very machloket. Halacha l'maaseh, the Ra'avad says that if a Kohen is tameh, he is permitted to become tameh again, and that would not be a problem. So that would mean that nowadays Kohanim could go and be doctors and go into cemeteries and all that. However, halacha is not like the Ravad. Nobody says so. And even the Ravad maybe only meant there's no punishment, or well, if he's holding on to a corpse currently, then he can touch another one. But Rambam says no. Even though a Kohen is Tameh Lamet, he is not allowed to become Tameh Lamet again. So that is the practical halacha for Kohanim, and that's why it is a problem, even though they are already Tameh Lamet. Okay, so now back to Nazir. We have this machloket. Rav Huna says it is a problem. Damar Rav Huna. Nazir, according to Rav Yosef, Nazir shaya omed bebet hakebarot, ve'oshitu lo meto umet acher, ve'naga bo hayav. Here, Rav Huna himself says that a Nazir who was already in the cemetery, and they passed him his a body of his relative. Nazir is not allowed to become tameh for a relative. But now, let's say he violated here, and now he's already tameh lamet, so he's liable once. And then they passed him another dead body. I guess, while you're there, listen, you're carrying yours. While you're there, listen, we're going to pass you another deceased person. And so, since he's already tameh lamet from the first one, and now he touches the second one, v'nagabo hayav, he nevertheless is liable again for the second one, even though he was already tameh lamet. So Rav Huna said this. Now, amai hamit tameh v'kaim, why should he be liable? He was already tameh lamet. Elalav shemamina ma Rav Huna filu tumah v'tumah. So we see that Rav Huna says explicitly that yes, you can become tameh. You are liable for becoming tameh again and again. So that is Rav Yosef's challenge, and he seems to have a direct quote from Rav Huna. Okay, now itibe Abaye. Abaye is now going to challenge Rav Yosef based on the Baraita and say, no, it looks like one should not become liable twice. Here's the Baraita. Kohen sheyad lo met munach al ketefo. Okay, we're learning now. We're going to do the comparison to a Kohen. A Kohen had a dead body and he was carrying it on his shoulder. Okay, that causes the Kohen to be tameh. V'oshito lo meto umet acher. And then, while he's already tameh, so they send him this corpse of his relative, and then yet another one. They could be talking about a Kohen Gadol who's not allowed to be tameh even for a relative, or a regular Kohen if he's touching a body that is not a relative, or even if it is a relative, he still is tameh lamet. Okay, so they send him. This is while you're there and you're carrying one already. Here, take this body. יכול יהיה חייב, תלמוד לומר, ולא יחלל במי שאינו מחולל יעשה זה, שהוא מחולל ועומד. So, can it be that he would be chayav for touching the second body? That's what I know, but not so, because the pasuk says, lo yechalel, he shall not profane, meaning if he is not already chol. But if someone is already chol, meaning already tameh, then he is not liable. So we see from here that regarding a kohen who is already tameh and then touches another dead body, we do not apply the liability to him. And so this is a challenge to Rav Yosef, because if there's a Braita that says there is no tumah after tumah, then how could Rav Huna say that there is tumah after tumah? So Rav Yosef says, hold on, I have my own source, Tanaitic source. In fact, that's our very own Mishnah. Ditnan, היה מתטמא למתים כל היום, אינו חייב אלא אחת. אמרו לו, אל תטמא, חייב על כל אחת ואחת. והמאי, והמתטמא וקיים. And our Mishnah says, if he's walking around the cemetery all day long, that's one span. Fine, that's only one. But if they separate and say, don't become tameh, wait, or he's liable to each and every one. Why? Isn't he already tameh lamet? So what's the difference if they warn him or not warn him? How could you ever be tameh? How could you ever be liable more than once? Oh, so we see from here that there is tumah after tumah from this Mishnah. So now we have a problem not at the Amoraic level, but rather at the Tanaitic level. We have a Baraita and a Mishnah that contradict each other. Ela kasha hadadeh. So instead of asking the question to me, Rav Yosef says, let's both together solve this Baraita and Mishnah. So we answer, La kashya kan bechiburin, kan shelo bechiburin. The Baraita is talking about concurrent or connected. In other words, if a Kohen is already holding on to one dead body, and that was the case there, and at the same time they pass him another one. So since he's already touching a dead body, and then they pass him another one, we do not apply liability after liability, because he's already in contact with the first one. Whereas in the Mishnah, that's talking about shelo bechiburin. That's talking about a case where he went and touched one body, and then he walked away. And then, they warn him, hey, don't do it again. And then he goes back and touches the same body or another body. In that case, since there is a separation between them, he's not connected to both of them, that's why it says chayav here. So that explains why, in the case of a Kohen, of the Braita, that's okay. It does not have another liability because he's already tameh met and he's touching both of them, so it's concurrent and is connected. But if he separates and is no longer touching at the same time, then it does produce an extra tum'ah. And so that not only solves the contradiction, but also Rav Yosef answers Rav Yosef's interpretation for Rav Huna. Yes, there is tum'ah after tum'ah, as long as it's not concurrent. Okay, now that we mentioned this phrase, chiburin, we're going to have to clarify, because actually chiburin can refer to two different cases, as we're going to answer here. One is touching two corpses at the same time, one person, and the other is if person A is touching a corpse and person B touches person A. So in the question level, we're assuming that it would be the same law. And we say, v'tumah bechiburim deoraita. Wait a second, is tum'ah that's concurrent even a deoraita to begin with, that you had to go and answer? Oh, there's no liability because it's touching concurrently. Wait a second, this entire type of tum'ah does not apply deoraita. It's only derabanan. How so? Ha amar Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef amar Rabbi Yanai lo amru tumah bechiburin ela litruma vekodashim aval lenazir ve'oseh pesach lo v'amat deoraita ma'ishena. Rabbi Yanai says that they only said, when we're talking about we're talking about the rabbis, right? They applied this tumah bechiburin only for Tiruman Kodashim. Here's the scenario. A is touching a corpse. So A is tameh deoraita, 7 days, all that. B touches A. So B, we say, is also tameh for 7 days if they're all touching each other at the same time. If they're not touching, if A now is not touching the corpse and B touches A, then he's only tameh for 1 day. But if they're touching at the same time, even B is tameh for 7 days. However, that only applies for B eating Tiruman Kodashim. He has to treat himself as if he's Tameh Lamet, and he has to stay away for 7 days. So that's only for Chumrah. But for Nazir and Pesach, we do not say so. Why? Nazir, what we'll say is, listen, Nazir, wait 7 days. Don't count those 7 days, but it doesn't cancel the days you did before, and you don't have to bring korbanot. Because we could be machmir, but we can't be mekel. And if we tell a Nazir you're the same as Tameh Met, he's going to bring korbanot. You can't bring the korban hatat if you don't have to. So for a Nazir, we do not treat him like Tameh Met. Pesach is simpler, easier to understand. If you have someone who's within 2 days of Pesach, and that's B, and he touches A, touching a corpse. If we tell him, sorry, you're Tameh for 7 days, then he won't be able to eat Korban Pesach or prepare Korban Pesach, and then that's a karet. That's a problem. So we're not going to be lenient on him to say, no, you don't do Korban Pesach. So therefore, we do not apply this Derabanan to Nazir and Pesach, but only the Chumrah for Teruma and Kodashim. Now, if it was a Tum'ah Deoraita, then there would be no difference. That's it. Sorry, Nazir, you have to do it all over again, bring Korbanot. Pesach, sorry, you can't bring your Korban Pesach. We don't say that. So you see that the whole prohibition of Tum'ah Bechiburin is only the Rabbanan. And therefore, back in that Baraita, what are you talking about? That he's touching one and touching the other, and you say, oh, there's no liability. It would be no, of course there's no liability. The whole thing is only the Rabbanan in the first place. So we answer, no, there's two, we use the same word. It's confusing. Kan bechibure adam be'adam, kan bechibure adam be'met. Here we're talking about a person touching another person. That's what Rabbi Yanai is talking about. Person A, B, touching person A, who is touching a corpse. That is only the Rabbanan. It does not apply to Nazir. However, that Baraita was talking about chibur adam bemet, if one person is touching two corpses at the same time, and he's a Kohen or a Nazir. In that case, if he's already touching one and he touches the second one, no added liability. Now that we resolved all the questions against Rav Yosef's interpretation of Rav Huna, now we're going to turn back to Rabbah. So, re-quoting what Rabbah had said, he said, Aval tum'ah v'tum'ah la, tahamit tameh v'ka'im. He said that a Nazir that's already tameh lamet, and then becomes tameh lamet again, no liability, because he was already tameh. And so Rabbah doesn't have a problem of tum'ah after tum'ah. Here's the question. Tuma ubi'a nameh hamit tameh v'ka'eh. If you remember, that original statement that we quoted said that we learn a lot of things from the pasuk, and from the pasuk, let's get it again. From this pasuk, lo yitama, we learn any of the three ways, and from lo yavo, we learn that with tent impurity, he is liable 2 times for entering into a tent. Now, here's the question. If the person, what's the case? If he was tameh already, and then he entered into a tent and now became tameh again, so then it wouldn't be a problem because he was already tameh. So, why would he, and you're allowed to become tameh. A Nazir is allowed to become tameh if he was already tameh. So if he was already tameh and then he entered into a house, he wouldn't violate anything at all. So how would it be a case where you violate being tameh and entering into a tent? Now, for Rav Yosef's interpretation of Huna, this is not a problem because he said that a Nazir is liable every time they become tameh, and therefore, even if they touched a corpse outside and then they went and entered into a tent with a corpse, then they are violating again, becoming tameh and lo yavo. That's why it's twice. But according to Rabbah, who says no, you don't violate tum'ah after already being tameh. So if you're already tameh and then you enter the house, there's no violation. There's no double violation. Okay, there'll be no violation at all. All right. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, kan bebayit, kan beseder. Rabbi Yochanan says, I can explain it to you. Here, one case is where we're talking about entering into a house. When Rav Huna says that, according to Rabbah, that you're liable to both, that's when he was not tameh at all, and he was outside, he was tahor, and then he enters into a house. Because he enters into a house with a corpse, so he becomes tameh lamet, and enters into a house simultaneously, and that's why he gets both prohibitions. Whereas, when would it be possible to violate only once? If you're in a field and you touch a corpse, so then you violate only lo yitama, but you do not violate lo yavo. Okay, so that's a simple answer, but not quite so simple. Hold on. Bebait nameh kevan de ael yadeh ista'av kel ael kulehai tamehu. Wait a second. Even if you're entering in a house, if you're entering and you're swinging your arms, and then one's hand enters into the house first, already just inserting a hand makes the whole person tameh lamet. And so when their body enters the house a second later, they already are tameh lamet. And so you would not add a second prohibition. So you see, that is a problem. It's impossible because to have them concurrent. So Ela Amar Rabbi Elazar Seref Yado Mishum Tumaika Mishum Bi'a Leka. Rabbi Elazar explains, you're right. If he inserted his hand first, then he would be tameh lamet, but he would not violate entering into the house because he already was tameh when his body entered. But I have a better solution. V'seref igufo tum'ah ubi'ah behadadeh gufe ka'atu. What if he keeps his hands at his side or behind him, and then he enters into the house with just with his body and his hands behind his back? So in that case, that would work because his body is entering into the house and he was simultaneously becoming tameh lamet and entering the house, and that's how he gets two violations at once. But we say, no, that also doesn't work. But no, his nose would enter first, right? You're entering in, and your nose is sticking out just a little bit, and that doesn't take long. And so the nose makes him, since the nose is inside, that makes his body tameh. And then a half second later, when the rest of his body enters, he was already tameh lamet. And if you're already tameh lamet, according to Rabbah, you don't get a second tum'ah, so there will be no violation of lo yavo. So that's not good either. Ela amar Rabbah, hichnis yado mishum tuma'ika mishum bi'a leka. You're right. If he put his hand in first, then there would be problem of tum'ah. He would violate tum'ah, but he would not violate bi'ah entering into the house because he was already tameh. Hichnis gufo tum'ah bi'ah behadeh adadeh ka'atyan. But let's say he goes in with his body. He kind of sticks out his chest and puts his nose back, his head back, and that way his actual body is entering before his nose, before his arms, before anything else. So then that would work, right? No, still no good. Certainly, his toes would enter first. He has to walk in somehow, and so when he takes a step, his toe is entering the house first. That's making him tameh lamet. But his body, right, and the prohibition of entrance applies to his torso, has not yet entered, and so he would violate one first, and then once he's tameh lamet, he would not violate lo yavo. So we don't have a solution. So finally, ela amar papa. כגון שנכנס בשידה תיבה ומגדל ובא חברו פרה עליו את המעזיבה דתומה וביאה בהדה הדדה כעתיין. Here we have a case where a person enters into Nazir enters into a house in a chest, a box, or a cabinet. It would be sufficiently big, more than 40 se'ah, such that it protected the person inside from tent impurity. So he'd be fine. And then someone comes and opens it up. And so, with his knowledge and agreement. And that way, he violates both at the same time. As soon as he opens it up, he enters into the space, because he was in a separate space before, in a separate enclosure, and he becomes tameh lamet. And there you go. Here we have such a case where, even according to Rabbah, one can violate both at the same time. Mor bar Rabbah she'amar, kigon da'ayel kishu goses, unfak dishmate adiyatib, tetumau bi'ah behadeh hadadeh ka'atyan. Or yet another solution, he enters into the home when there's a person there who is alive, but on his deathbed. He's gonna pass away at any moment. And so then he's sitting there in the house. So he didn't violate entering into a house with a corpse because the guy's still alive, right? Not dead yet. And then he dies while he's there. So the second that the patient dies, then he fills creates tent impurity, and the Nazir who's sitting there enters into a house with a corpse and becomes tameh lamet at exactly the same split second, and that's how he violates both at the same time. We can learn something incidentally from this, that it can be a problem for a Kohen to enter into a home of a goses. If he wants to visit, someone on his deathbed or so on, there's a lot of halachic discussion about that, whether or not a Kohen is permitted to do that, or if the person is about to die any second, then the Kohen should prevent themselves from possibly being in the room as the person dies, and then adding tumat met to themselves. All right, very interesting and somewhat applicable laws. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.